Well, you can't win them all. Hey everyone, welcome to Cinema, where we focus on film, and today we are going to be giving you my top 10 worst movies of 2023. And a quick disclaimer, I do wish the best for all of these creators that have put this work together. I hope they have enjoyed making their work and still enjoy the outcome of what they do. And this is just a bias that I have for what personal tastes I have toward movies, and so these aren't necessarily meant to be the worst movies of all time. These aren't meant to be bad movies necessarily. These are just movies that didn't vibe with me. But with that said, coming in at number 10, we have Insidious: The Red Door, one that just didn't vibe with the first franchise. And the first movie is a great one, and unfortunately it kind of starts to fall off as they start to remake all of these sequels that unfortunately do not vibe, do not bring up something totally original to go with along with it. And unfortunately the story and the characters involved just didn't play out in the way that I would have hoped for as the franchise continues. And coming in at number 9, we have Haunted Mansion. Now this is a family Disney movie, so it's not, of course, meant to be one of the greatest horror movies, of a spooky one, but I still didn't have a whole lot of fun with it. The comedy was off. I'm not always into comedy, so it just didn't quite click in all the right places with the boring sort of subplots, the way they go about it that are kind of obvious that you expect it to go. And so while it did have a couple few moments that did vibe, it just didn't click all the way. And coming in number 8, we have Expendables 4. Now, when Jason Statham is on screen, there are some great moments, some great action. The way they play out is a bit of fun, but the team dynamic doesn't have the best of chemistry in my personal opinion. What they do with Sylvester Stallone in this movie just didn't work in all the right ways that I think they were wanting it to go. And unfortunately, some of the way the action and CGI is all put together just doesn't look like the product they were making when putting all the money that it had into this project. And so at the end of the day, it looks like not so great a movie for something that wasn't so great of a franchise for my personal taste. But coming in at number 7, we have Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Now, while this did have a great first entry, in my personal opinion, for the fun and action that Ella had, the world that we dive into doesn't feel as adventurous and exploratory, especially as you're going into all of these natures and different new environments and settings that just don't have a personality, don't have a purpose outside of just really continuing a story that felt rather generic, felt repetitive of what we've seen in the first, because we're getting a return revenge of Black Manta versus Aquaman, and yet it takes a while for certain battles to occur, and nothing is too surprising that plays out in the story, and so you kind of get the general gist of what is all going to play out. And so unfortunately this one ended up at the lower end of the list. But along the same end, we have at number 6, Shazam Fury of the Gods, another DCEU film that didn't quite close out the chapter of this franchise to a good extent. Shazam, I wasn't a fan of the first movie, and the comedy and drama mixture of the second movie wasn't too much better. And add to the fact that we get some fairly generic villains. We don't remember the name. We don't particularly remember what they personally do that stands out from the rest of some of the other superhero villains that we've seen. And so unfortunately, this one ends up at the lower end of that list, as well as my 2023 list in general, that just did not have a whole lot going for it for my anticipation. And the end product wasn't too delightful either in my taste. But coming in at number 5, we have Candy Lane, Eddie Murphy bringing a fun, delightful Christmas movie that unfortunately wasn't too fun and delightful in my personal opinion. The rules that they brought up just was sort of coincidental in what they were going about. How they were doing it was predictable and didn't bring a whole lot of fun and Christmas spirit to me personally. And so just the dynamics that they had with the characters, what they were going for, just what they were doing wasn't treated with in the proper manner of Eddie Murphy being a strict father in certain things, bringing things together, and the way they try and resolve it is quickly dealt with and not too realistically drawn together for my taste of what I love when you bring a good, strong, strict father's figure, and what they do with that. It has to be dealt with pretty well for me to really enjoy it, and the comedy wasn't all too much my taste either. But coming in number 4, we have LEGO Marvel Adventures Code Red. Now this was a fairly 45-minute short on Disney Plus that, of course, it goes along the same lines of what I was saying in the Candy Cane Lane, that they were having a father, what they're doing with that, and all these different things. It did have a good bit of fun. I always liked those little Lego Easter eggs because I'm a big Lego fan that drew me into this film. But the dynamics between these superheroes made it to be not the greatest, not the most comedically well-balanced film that brought some fun to the table, but didn't have the right jive that floated into the right narrative structure that should have ought to be. And coming in number 3, we have Marlo. Now, I am a big guilty pleasure Liam Neeson film, so those are often all of my vibe type of movies, just anything he's put into. But this one, with the detective story, he didn't have a whole lot to his character. The story itself was quite a slog and dragged along in such an uninteresting manner. Didn't have too much going for the plot, and despite being a mystery that should make you really try and keep engaged and keep you guessing what's going on, what's going to happen, it just felt like not even predictable necessarily, but not having an interesting story that really kept me engaged with the plot outside of trying to watch the movie for being a movie that has Liam Neeson that didn't unfortunately have too much to offer for this film particularly. And coming in number 2, we have Plane. Now this is one that I've heard great things about, and unfortunately does not fit well with me. For me, being an intercultural studies major, it just goes into these different cultures in such an unprofessional way, in such a thing that just doesn't fit the manner well. And while, yes, it's not trying to focus on that particularly, it is present in the movie. And so with my love for its particular storytelling, exploring new cultures, the way they go about certain ideas and what they do with that is very unexplored. It makes the villains very flat, very generic for just going into another country, trying to get the protagonist out of the film because they crash their plane there, have to get some help, and are stuck in all of these different situations. That makes sense for a general one face value look at the story, but doesn't explore much more than that. That fits my vibe of what I would have loved from this film. But that leaves at the worst film of 2023, unfortunately, that I have seen, Cocaine Bear. This dives into a whole lot of bonkers comedy that should and ought to work if you're into big game bonkers comedy where you can turn off your brain, take out a realism, because it's based on a true story that the bear takes cocaine and just ends up passing out, doesn't kill anyone, and goes into this bonkers way of having this bear go wild, going on a killing spree throughout all the people that are involved. And so there's still protagonists, there's still characters that are hateable and meant to be hateable. And so you're getting the predictability of the things out of the way already. But the way they go about it is, for me, pretty boring, pretty generic, and exactly what you expect, which should be good if you're wanting this sort of genre, if you're wanting this sort of bonkers, turn off your brain sort of thing. But for me personally, that's not my vibe. It doesn't go in all the right beats, in all the right ways that I not necessarily would have wanted from this film. There's not too much you can really ask from this film, because it would be a much boring film if they took the real life story, unless they made it into a documentary. But this film went for what it was trying to go for. But unfortunately for me, this film is not my cup of tea that I can turn off my brain, enjoy the bear that takes cocaine and goes wild. While there were a couple of fun moments, it just really was not something that really worked for me, making it my least favorite movie of 2023. So that's just my least favorite movies of 2023, and I love to talk cinema with you down in comments below. Be respectful, talk about all these different opinions, because we all have our own biases. What works with us, what works for film in general. So it doesn't even have to be the worst movies of 2023, but just things that didn't work for you because they're just not your cup of tea, as I've talked with some of these picks down in the comments below. Let's all share your top 4 movies. And before you leave, do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.